All right, it's playoff time. Margins are thin, lineups are tight, and running back decisions matter more than ever. Who can you trust headed into Week 14? Let's get into the top 30 running back rankings. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King. And before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings from the Headliners team. And for more detailed analysis, make sure to check out the start-sit videos from Kyle, already posted this week on the channel. And if you want even more breakdowns each week, make sure to join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting that join button below. That's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and a spot inside of our Discord. All right, we're going to do the quick and dirty top 30 for Week 14. We're going to jump right into Tier 1. We've got De'Von Achane, James Cook, Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, and Bucky Irving. Topping the list at number 1, we have De'Von Achane, and Achane remains the only running back to score at least 10 points in every one of his games this season. He needs more respect for that kind of consistency. Add in the fact that he has the Jets this week, who allow the 5th most fantasy points, and he is topping the list at number 1. At number 2, we have James Cook, and Cook hasn't had less than 17 fantasy points in a game over the last 3 weeks. He's the running back 6 overall in the season, and now he faces Cincinnati, who allows just under 30 fantasy points per game to running backs, and that's the most in the NFL. At number 3, we have Jonathan Taylor, and if Taylor can score 6 points, he will be the running back 1 overall passing CMC. His numbers have been down some over the last month, scoring less than 15 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4, but now he'll get a tough matchup against the Jags, who allow the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. At number 4, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, and Gibbs has been scoring so many points as of late. Seeing him only score 10 in Week 13 was a little disappointing. Now he'll get a matchup against an improved Dallas defense, who still allows around 20 fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 5, we have Bijan Robinson, and we finally got another big Bijan game in Week 13, 193 total yards and a touchdown, and now he's had 27 plus touches in 2 of his last 3, but will run into a tough Seattle defense this week, who allows the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 6, we have Josh Jacobs, and Jacobs was underwhelming in Week 3, but he is still fighting through injury. He's still seeing great volume, and the matchup against Chicago this week should be much easier than the one last week against Detroit. Coming in at number 7, we have Chase Brown, and it's great to see Brown stay productive in Burrow's first game back. Another game with at least 110 total yards, and the passing work has been a big boost. He's had 7 plus targets in 3 of his last 4, and now he gets a Bills defense that allows over 23 fantasy points per game. At number 8, we have Bucky Irving, and we finally have got our Bucky back. It was so great to see him produce instantly and rack up 19 total touches, and that tells us that he should be used heavily going forward against an average run defense like the New Orleans Saints. All right, baby, so that's Tier 1. And before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all set up on an Underdog for the playoff push. And you already know that we're crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app and create a new account using the referral code Headliners when you do so. Then just make your initial deposit, come join a contest. And if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's Headliners, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. And check this out, when you play your first $5, they're going to give you a $100 Benjamin in bonus funds. So you play 5, you get 100. It's that easy. Don't forget, Jake's been breaking down the best picks weekly in a show on Fridays to make you some money, and links to join are in the description, and we look forward to playing with you this week. All right, let's turn the page to Tier 2. We've got Breece Hall, Derrick Henry, Kyron Williams, Quinshon Judkins, RJ Harvey, Saquon Barkley, Javonte Williams, and Ashton Genty. At number 9, we've got Breece Hall, and Breece has had a touchdown or 100 yards in each of his last 2 games with Tyrod. More importantly, he remains at 20 touches per week. Now he'll get a Miami defense who is much easier to run on, and he had over 100 total yards against back in Week 4. At number 10, we've got Derrick Henry, and Henry's still the RB10 overall and has scored 16 plus points in 3 straight. The volume sucked last week, but he had 20 plus touches in each of the 6 games prior. The last time he faced Pittsburgh, he had 189 9 total yards, so our fingers are crossed here. At number 11, we've got Kyren Williams, and it sucks that he's sharing goal line duties with Davante Adams, but the part I'm concerned about with is the volume. He's had just 13 touches in 3 straight, and we need to be that above 18 down the stretch, and this matchup against Arizona is the perfect place to do that. At number 12, we have Quinshon Judkins, and despite Cleveland's low-scoring offense, Judkins continues to score points. It helps when he has games with 26 touches like last week, and in a matchup against another low-scoring team like Tennessee, Judkins could easily see that volume again. At number 13, we have RJ Harvey, and Harvey racked up 62 total yards and 2 touchdowns in a great matchup against Washington last week. Now we're lucky enough to benefit from another great matchup this week going up against Vegas, who allows over 21 fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 14, we have Saquon Barkley, and we're entering week 14, in which Saquon only has 2 games all year long with over 100 total yards. It's easy matchups, tough matchups. It doesn't seem to matter. They match up against LA. It's not going to be easy this week, but at least they're easier to run on than throw on. At number 15, we have Javonte Williams, and Javonte continues to be one of the most reliable running backs this season. He was able to put up 80 total yards and a touchdown in a tough matchup last week against KC, and he'll have to do it again against another tough defense this week in Detroit. At 16, we have Ashton Jeanty, and Jeanty faced this Denver defense a few weeks ago and ended with 63 total yards and a touchdown. Obviously, the touchdowns are hit and miss in Vegas, but expecting similar yardage is probably a great place to start this week, but we really need that touchdown, though. All right, let's move it on to tier 3, and we've got Travis Etienne Jr., DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Walker III, Jaylen Warren, Kyle Monangai, Kareem Hunt, and Omarion Hampton. At number 17, we have Travis Etienne Jr., and week 13 was a huge letdown. He had arguably his worst game of the season against Tennessee last week. 13 touches for 41 total yards. It's just not going to cut it around playoff time. The matchup doesn't get any easier this week against Indy, and so we're crossing our fingers. At number 18, we've got DeAndre Swift, and after a couple of down weeks, Swift bounced back in week 13 with a 20-point performance. He's now the RB16 overall, despite a split backfield with Kyle Monangai. This week, they'll both have to contend with a top 10 run defense, though, in Green Bay. At number 19, we have Kenneth Walker, and TBH, Walker hasn't been playing bad at all. Zach Charbonnet just continues to kill our fantasy hopes and dreams, and at least this week he gets a bottom 10 defense going against Atlanta, who allows almost 22 fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 20, we have Jaylen Warren, and Jaylen Warren might be a top 12 fantasy running back if he could just get away from Pittsburgh and Arthur Smith. Unfortunately, for now, he's stuck there, and we're going to get games where he only gets 12 touches like he did 2 of the last 3 weeks. At number 21, we have Kyle Monangai, and despite Swift being heavily involved, Monangai continues to rack up fantasy points. He has touchdowns in 4 straight and even had 22 touches last week. He's a firm part of this offense and will contend with a tough Green Bay defense this week as well. At number 22, we have Kareem Hunt, and Pacheco may have returned, but this is still Kareem Hunt's backfield. He now has 5 touchdowns over the last 5 weeks, and he should get plenty of chances against a Houston defense that is easier to run on. At number 23, we have Omarion Hampton, and all signs are pointing to a Hampton return this week. He will face a Philly defense that just gave up over 250 yards rushing to the Bears' backfield. And if he's fully healthy and Herbert is limited or out, we could see a big game in his return. All right, that's it for tier 3. Now let's move it on to tier 4. We've got Chris Rodriguez, Woody Marks, Jordan Mason, David Montgomery, Devin Neal, Zach Charbonnet, and Kenneth Gainwell. At number 24, we have Chris Rodriguez, and for multiple weeks, we've been talking about C-Rod taking over the backfield here, and he may have only had 11 touches in week 13, but he is the clear leader of that backfield and now has touchdowns in 3 of his last 4. He's a mid to low-end flex option this week. At number 25, we have Woody Marks, and if you told us this offseason that Big Woody was going to be getting 20 touch games, we would have expected him to be a top 15 running back. But he's only gone over 70 yards once in the last 5 weeks, and he just isn't being used in the passing game. At number 26, we have Jordan Mason. And with Aaron Jones suffering a shoulder injury, chances are that we see more Mason in week 14. Unfortunately, the passing game is so bad in Minnesota that defenses are shutting down the run and getting after the quarterback, and that's why Mason isn't ranked higher. At number 27, we have David Montgomery. And do you remember those days when we could just lock him into the top 24? Well, those days are gone because he hasn't had more than 10 touches in a game in the last 3 weeks, and he only has 2 touchdowns over the last 2 months. That makes him a Verge top 30 guy at best. At number 28, we have Devin Neal, and Neal saw more work as expected last week. Unfortunately, his 17 touches only turned into 69 total yards. His matchup isn't horrible against Tampa this week, but this Saints offense hasn't been able to produce anything in the running game all year long. At 29, we have Zach Charbonnet, and another week and another touchdown for Charbonnet, and that's now a touchdown in 3 of his last 4. He's getting almost everything around the goal line, and now they get a matchup against Atlanta, who allows over 21 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. At number 30, we have Kenneth Gainwell, and Aaron Rodgers returned, and that meant less Gainwell. He looks good when he gets the ball, but only 7 touches makes it impossible for consistent production. Add in a tough matchup, and it's hard to put him any higher than tier 4. All right, so there's your quick and dirty top 30 in tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we've got a few guys on the outside looking in, and Blake Corum, Bam Knight, Bashal Tootin, Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears, and Tyler Algier. And come on, man, that's your week 14 running backs. Drop your takes in the comments below. And remember, one good call can push you into the playoffs. One bad one can end the ride early. So make some smart plays, trust the data, and finish strong. And let's go get a W this week, Headliner Nation.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same.